President.
Thank you, Madam President. Before the break, I was on the topic of gaslighting and getting to healthcare. On September 22nd, 2018, the Prime Minister said, even though citizens continue to badmouth the country's public hospitals, he believes that the nation has the best public healthcare system in the Commonwealth. Instinctively, Madam President, you must know that this statement cannot be true. But now you're second-guessing yourself, because that is what gaslighting does. Why would the Prime Minister make such an outlandish statement, one that can so easily be proven false? I mean, quick research on some articles about the best healthcare in the world. I mean, surely for the best healthcare, in the Commonwealth, someone out there in this great global village would know about it. So I did a cursory search, and all the usual articles came up, and several of them had the United Kingdom, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, all ranking before Trinidad and Tobago. So I said, this cannot be right, because why would the Prime Minister say something so preposterous, and there must be some information somewhere out there that I missed. So I go to the World Health Organization. I could not find one list that had us ranking in the top 60, much less anywhere ranking higher than people in other countries in the Commonwealth. But those rankings aside, I said perhaps the Prime Minister was talking about the lived experiences of people in Trinidad and Tobago. Maybe he spoke to some people and they say, hey, this is the best, right? So when you go into public healthcare institutions, do you feel like you are experiencing quality, state-of-the-art care? I know the minister in the Ministry of Finance repeated that we are at least somewhat there. But my experience, and the experience from the persons in the budget consultations that I referenced before, spoke about long waiting hours, rundown facilities, and an overburdened and underappreciated staff. You see, the budget consultations had so many people talking about suffering and waiting for care. I think there was an article recently of a person who died waiting for health care in St. James. Yes. So you have these stories, but you have this statement from the Prime Minister, and then they'll try to deny that they are gaslighting the population. You see, my own grandmother went into the clinic at San Fernando General Hospital to be treated for high blood pressure. At somewhere in between this, she left there with medication for kidney failure, something she never had. And we caught it before there was any damage, but not everyone could be so lucky. So what I'm saying is, don't come here and tell us that we have the best healthcare in the Commonwealth. Do the work to fix the healthcare system. If that is what you can do, the work. You don't have to just pretend and make these unbelievable statements and expect the population to live with that. So I cannot come here yet again and debate the merits or drawbacks of their healthcare policy or their overall healthcare plan, because they do not have one. What they have are outlandish statements. They will come to talk about reducing expenditure on buildings, but they will not say that they reduce the scope of works, and that is why the expenditure coming down. So you see, Madam President, the totality of their failure as a government means that we cannot and we do not have the space to discuss that which is strategic or forward-thinking, because the government has kept the vast majority of us stuck at base level. And this brings me to roads. On the heels of the Prime Minister, you have the Minister of Finance entering the competition to see who could say the most outlandish thing. So in a discussion about roads, because every year we have the same problem and the same discussion, because it seems to be impossible to institute a road repair and maintenance plan. That seems to be an impossible task. So we have the Minister of Finance saying that millions have been spent on roads in rural areas, and more than what is spent in urban areas. I live in a rural community. Is the minister suggesting that we are imagining these potholes, that they don't exist? Whether or not you're spending the money is not the question. The people are telling you that there is a problem. You cannot now tell us that the problem does not exist because you spent some money. Whether or not you allocated the money did not mean that the roads were fixed. So everybody in this country is mad, people, except for the people who wear Balize ties, because that's the only way they could be going. Yes, a little humility would go a long way. Maybe an explanation of what was fixed versus what you plan to fix and how you plan to maintain it. That's just, not that we give all of the money, millions went by all you, what more you want? Because the people of Garth Road, I can tell you, right, did not see the benefits of the millions of dollars. I read that people of Maruga plan on naming Sinanan Drive and Imbert Avenue because the roads are so bad. And they are telling these people that is in their imagination. The road good. We spend money by all. The road is good. This is madness, Madam President. You see, the gaslighting technique feeds into our wider communication strategies on how you deal with informing the public. A lot of our problems can be addressed and fixed with work, proper governance, and basically what you need is people who are ready to work to take Trinidad and Tobago forward. And it cannot be this government, because they've had 3 years to do the work, and they've given us 3 years of excuses, and they've tried to convince us of an alternate reality. They are trying to convince us of this turnaround that we all know to be false. We, Madam President, are under strain as a population, and they're right. Things are quite different from 2015 because none of us feel better off now. So I turn to this question of the gas subsidy because I want to assume that the Minister of Finance, and if not him, the government of which he's a part, must deeply regret the "they haven't rioted yet" comment. And if he doesn't regret it, he should at least regret that it was on tape, because we will always remember that he said that. But this is another gem of a justification coming out of the budget. The minister says that it will be persons on the lowest rungs of the income bracket that stand to benefit from the money to be saved in 2019 from the government's decision to raise the price of super gasoline. That the lowest rung of society stands to benefit. I don't know who the minister knows from the lowest rung of the income bracket, but I can assure him no one was celebrating the increase in gas prices. You see, because the food cards that they promised and the grants are worth less now because the cost of living is higher. And so to tell us that we save some money here, but we're giving it back to all you here, is to give us with one hand and grab it away with the next hand. And then tell us, but it is for you, gaslighting, Madam President. So you know who is also really feeling the pinch of this increase, this removal of the fuel subsidy and the increase in the price of supercars? The middle class. You see, by the end of this government's time in office, the middle class would have to be referred to as the working poor, because you earn enough money not to be able to access these grants, etc., that they are now promising you. The means test will show that you ought to be able to pay to send your children to university. But the reality is that the policies of this government has made it extremely hard for the hardworking, honest people of this country. People who are your teachers, your nurses, your police officers, your prison officers, your public servants, the people who go to work day by day, and they're not asking the government for anything. They're not asking you to give us more than we are owed as part of your social contract. We pay our taxes, we send our children to school, we stay out of trouble. And I ask them, what is in this budget for you? You see, whatever you are surviving on or you were surviving on before is becoming incrementally smaller. The burden of this government's political fiction has fallen on the middle class, squarely on the shoulders of the middle class. People who are trying their best to be good citizens, those are the ones who are unduly burdened. And they come here time and time again to tell us about patriotism and who is a patriot. And we have to ask, now, is this paying off? These measures that they've put in place, are you safer now? For all their talk, and people of this country safer now? Do you feel secure in your job? If you've recently graduated, or as is the status quo now, recently got terminated, do you feel like you could get another job shortly? Do you genuinely believe the economy has improved? Are you confident enough to open a business? Has your purchasing power increased? Are you getting better health care? Are your children better educated? Have they even fixed and maintained your roads or improved your drainage? The answer to most of the people is no. And so at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves, as a result of the policies put in place by this PNM administration, has it been put in place to create a robust and thriving middle class that will drive our country forward? And they will tell us, Madam President, they will come here with all sorts of numbers and figures to convince us that the things we know to be true don't exist. Madam President, I turn quickly to Petrotrin. And the Minister of Public Utilities had an African proverb, and I have one for him. You see, the axe forgets what the tree remembers. And this population witnessed a government that was an axeman in Petrotrin. And
Senator Haynes, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you. And the tree will remember, Madam President. You see, the sheer arrogance of this administration that has left thousands of people dangling, going on and about whether or not their jobs are safe, to know all is the answer. To have a Minister of Communications come here and tell us that it was communicated effectively, despite us telling them, witnessing, living through 2 months of a communications train wreck on a major public policy decision, and to tell us that what we know to be true did not exist. Madam President, the tree will remember, right? And then we look at while people are collecting their letters of retrenchment, they are advertising new positions. They feel okay with that. They are advertising positions for management, Madam President. So I took a look at some of the positions advertised, and I want to tell the government, if you plan on bringing the same management, you will have the same problems, the same top-heavy approach, the same nepotism, and the same cronyism. And so this is what the nation goes through every time we elect a PNM government. Same old mismanagement, same old problems. And what Petrotrin has showed us is that this government has a willingness to ignore the fact that they created a problem and come here to pretend to be the savior. And that in and of itself is psychological abuse, because you are creating the problem and telling us you are the solution. You cannot be the solution to a problem you created. It is very clear to the population now that you are the problem. So, Madam President, what do we have over the past 3 years? We have witnessed a crisis in leadership. We have witnessed a government that has never sought to tell us what they would do to take our country forward. We have witnessed an administration comfortable with pursuing their blame game while the country imploded around them. We have witnessed the worst period of governance in our country's history. We have witnessed movements towards tyranny, where fear is used to keep people from exercising their democratic right. And I would like to quote here, Madam President, from Lenny Niblet, Massa Day Done. And it speaks to a participation crisis, which can be defined as a conflict that occurs when the governing elite views the demands of or behavior of individuals and groups seeking to participate in the political system as illegitimate. You see, what he was talking about is a governing elite that tries to grow its power while stifling the power of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Their legislative approach, their tax increases, the government is seeking to build itself up while stifling the rest of us. And they want to hold the reins of power, Madam President, but they do not want to be responsible for the crisis that they have created. Trinidad and Tobago is at a very important crossroad. We in the opposition took a strategic decision that our political leader will use her budget response not to lick down the government, but to articulate plans and policies to take our country forward. That is because our country deserves better. For 3 years, we have heard this government vilify workers, place the blame on us, place the blame on all manner of people for the state that we are in. They like to tell us the PNM is a premier political institution, and they've been in existence for long, and that they've held the reign of power for long. So logic will dictate that much of what is happening here today is a result of your chronic mismanagement. Our country and our people deserve better. So we will continue to roll out our plans and policies. And we will continue to invite anyone truly interested in national development to come forward and help us rebuild our sweet TNT. Because gone are the days that you should just vote someone out, because we are sure that you will be voted out. But we are also giving everyone an opportunity to vote us in, because we will show you that we have what it takes to take our country forward.
Yeah, man. Very good.
Minister of Trade and Industry.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam President. I'm always happy to speak on the budget debate. I spoke already in the lower house, so it'll be a little difficult, but I'll speak less of some things and more of some things, and hopefully, all told, we come out with what the Ministry of Trade and Industry is doing. Before I start, let me just do a bit of correction before going forward. Senator Mark, and I'm not going to take the time, I know Minister in the Ministry of Finance will deal with you, but I know today you were wearing your trade unionism hat, without a doubt. But I want to tell you two things. There's no such thing as flat growth, and I'll always remember you for that. And the second thing is, you spoke about transfer pricing, and you were making reference to companies like BPTT and so on. It's all right for us to come in here and speak about ourselves. But when you speak about the reputation, about private sector companies that are investing millions and millions and millions, billions in our country, you have to be careful and you have to act responsibly. So you spoke about transfer pricing and making reference to companies like BPTT. And I want to set the record straight that the issue has nothing to do with tax evasion or collection of back taxes, nothing at all like that, but rather the issues are contractual issues. They are not tax issues. I just wanted to correct you on that. Senator Hayes, you spoke about a lot of things, and my colleagues will correct you. But certainly the question of our country deserves better. Yes, Trinidad and Tobago deserves better. And this is why it's in the safe hands of the PNM, under the astute leadership of Dr. Roy. And you were talking about we will always remember the poor leadership under your last government. The question of a National Security Council that did not function. There was absolutely no leadership. And your government never listened to the population. And this is why you are where you are. And this is why you'll continue to stay where you are. You invited persons on a membership campaign. And I would say the PNM is open and we welcome all. And you may think about it. You talked about the basics. Senator Hayes. Obviously, you didn't listen, or maybe you didn't read, or you didn't take advice, but it was there for all to see in the budget. The basics, Senator Hayes, 24/7 opening hours for remote health centres. And an increase in the value of food support. Implementation of a new debit card system for food for support program. An increase in the disability grant. Disabled and special needs children will now receive a monthly grant of $1,500. Recipients 18 years and older a monthly grant of $2,000, an increase of $150 in public assistance grants, a more efficient delivery of pensionable services to retirees. I have to keep reminding you, a more efficient delivery of pensionable services to public service retirees, an increase in the cap on joint incomes received by retirees in respect of national insurance and old age pensions to $6,000. You obviously didn't listen. You obviously didn't read. An increase in tax allowance for tertiary education expenses from $60,000 to $72,000. How basic can you get, Senator Haynes? And let me just remind you that this country has seen the lowest inflation rate of 1% in decades. And, Madam President, let me start by again where I started in the lower house, and saying that this government has demonstrated prudence and decisiveness under the astute leadership of Dr. the Honourable Christopher Rowley, our Prime Minister. And we, as a government, we've continued to work on rebuilding our country and the economy and restoring confidence while exhibiting equity and social justice. I also take the opportunity to thank the Honourable Minister of Finance for his work in rebuilding our economy. I also thank the members of staff in the Ministry of Finance for their work done in the budget preparation. I also thank the Honourable Senator Alison West for her contribution in the budget as well, and her excellent delivery today. I'll go further and also thank the Honourable Minister of Planning and Honourable Minister of Planning, Honourable Camille Robinson-Regis, and I'll tell you why. All of our budget presentations, we come to you year after year after year. But this is contextualized actually in our National Development Strategy 2016-2030, Vision 2030. And we come to you budget after budget, and this is all because we're working towards our objectives of attaining all of our sustainable development goals. Madam President, much to the dismay of all of those on the other side, we have turned around this economy. And in keeping with our Vision 2030 agenda, the government remains steadfast in the pursuit of sound macroeconomic policies and fiscal policy strategies to take this country forward towards economic growth and, of course, a comfortable standard of living for all. I want to go straight into the Ministry of Trade and Industry's work, and I start by speaking of trade performance and exports. The opposition doesn't like the facts at all, but the facts are as they are. So I go to the CSO figures on exports, energy and non-energy exports. And I'm pleased that the total exports increased by 21% from 50 billion in 2016 to 62 billion in 2017. Total imports, on the other hand, reduced by 12% from 53 billion to 46 billion, making for an overall trade surplus. That is something to be recognized. When we look at non-energy exports, the exports grew by 25% from $12 billion in 2016 to $16 billion. As I said, a 25% increase. Non-energy imports, however, is not where we want it, and therefore we still have a trade deficit in terms of non-energy trade. However, it's important to note that the energy imports reduced from 39 billion to 35 billion, registering a 10% decrease, and that is heartening. But I've gone further to look at my TT Bislink figures to see how the figures are looking for January to September 2018 compared with that of the previous year, and again, registering significant increases in our non-energy exports in several major export markets. We looked at all of those. Good news, we looked at where the growth is, what countries we're exporting to, and certainly our larger trading markets, we are seeing the increase in exports, for instance, and I'm talking overall exports. I'm talking non-energy exports in this case. In the case of the United States, a 43%, this is comparing January to September 2018 with the same period in 2017, a 43% increase in exports to the United States. To CARICOM, a 5% increase in exports. To Costa Rica, a 34% increase in exports. And to Colombia, 2% increase, Canada a 6% increase. Again, all these figures are looking better and better, and we're doing the work and we'll continue to do the work to accelerate movement of goods and services into these export markets, but going beyond the traditional ones to the other ones that are absolutely necessary if it is we are to achieve growth and increase our revenue streams. That's all it has to be about, increasing our revenue streams and by extension earning foreign exchange and increasing job opportunities. I made the point, though, that I know that Senator Avinash Singh was a little bit hesitant about comments about buying local and so on. I still want to make the point that as a country, we're still a little bit too dependent on foreign goods. We really have to make to appreciate the things that are made locally. And I want to say in that vein, we proudly support, and we are doing so by making a contribution to the TTMA's campaign, supporting all things proudly made in Trinidad and Tobago. I just want to, at this point, correct one little statement speak to one statement which was made by Senator Shriki Soon when he expressed concern about the reduction under services in trade and repairs. And I sought to find out what really was encapsulated under trade and repairs, and largely it would have referred to wholesale and retail trade, including motor vehicle sales, motor vehicle repairs, and so on. So that has substantially reduced, and we are not displeased about that. So it's not something to be alarmed about. So we continue the good work in the ministry and through several of its agencies to increase our exports. And how is that done, and through what mechanisms? And Madam President, it is through the work of the Export TT in one instance. Again, so and one of the main things that Export TT does is facilitate trade missions, and the Ministry of Trade in itself actually supports the trade mission strategy as well. So there are several missions that would have been made during the fiscal year, and the focus is, again, away from the traditional markets. So we are starting to look at extra Caribbean territories, and by that I mean the extended Caribbean territories like Cuba, Dominican Republic, Haiti, and then looking further beyond that, looking at Central America, looking at Central America and South America as well. So we would have had missions going into last year: Costa Rica, Panama, Jamaica, Guyana, Colombia, Dominican Republic, and Haiti as well, with Haiti again to be done, and Canada, and also Cuba. And Madam President, we are seeing the results. We are seeing the increased entry of goods into Cuba, into Guyana, but I don't want to spend too much more time on that. But the work of Export TT is paramount in terms of increasing our revenue streams from the exports of goods primarily. Again, if we have to have a sustainable and a diversified export sector, the work of Export TT is very, very important. And so they continue doing their range of services in terms of co-financing, export promotion, trade missions, research, capacity building and training, and so on, and providing certificates of origin. The opposition would have wanted to say, well, would have asked the question, what have they done in the last year? And let me just briefly say, for instance, in 2018, fiscal 2018, with regard to co-financing, some 22 companies would have benefited from co-financing disbursements. With regard to research, 4 market surveys would have been done on Costa Rica, Colombia, Haiti, and Canada, guiding us as to whether those markets are suitable and whether it makes sense going into them. They would have worked on capacity building and training. There were 25 export-related training programs during the last fiscal year, in which 581 individuals were trained from 226 firms, small, medium, large firms. In addition to that, 25 persons were qualified as international trade specialists under the EBSI Export Academy initiative, and which is understanding. Those persons are then going back to their private sector companies and having a greater understanding of exports, export markets, and how you get your goods out there. They would have also done information dissemination seminars as well. They would have done export support plans for 22 companies, and that is identifying gaps and shortfalls in their exports again. And then, of course, several firms would have commenced implementation of international standards, which are like HACCP and UN standards and so on. Organic certification. Without those, you cannot enter in the respective markets. Further to that will be the business that is absolutely necessary, will be the business of trade agreements, and that's the work of the Ministry of Trade and Industry. So we would have continued work on the Panama Partial Scope Agreement. The Panama's Partial Scope Agreement. The first meeting of the Joint Administration Commission with the government of Panama will be held at the end in 2018. We are now implementing that agreement. It's one thing to sign agreements, we are implementing that. We are also working on the Partial Scope Agreement of Chile. Both countries have agreed, after our working group sessions, we have agreed to move on and progress to the stage of negotiating. And that's going to do us very well, Chile being a very substantial market. We are also reviewing the partial scope agreements of Guatemala and El Salvador. There are also some other agreements that potential countries that we would want to pursue partial scope agreements with. We are looking also at Curacao. We've been asked by the government of Curacao. We are examining the basis of that. We're also looking at perhaps Brazil. We have to look at those markets as we seek to find markets where our goods will be preferred, I have to say, or will be attractive. Another agreement that we have to give attention to and that we are doing is, in fact, the Caribbean Basin Initiative. As you know, Madam President, the U.S. is our largest trading partner, and most of the goods that we export are actually governed under this Caribbean Basin Initiative, which comprises of two programs: the Caribbean Basin Economic Recovery Act and the Caribbean Basin Trade Partnership Act. I'll tell you what the importance of these things, again, because of the importance of the market to Trinidad and Tobago, but it is that under one of them, the SABERA, duty-free entry to the USA is extended on a permanent basis for a particular range of goods. So that's important. It's a one-way advantage. And with regard to the other agreement, the TPA, it is that there are these other products that enter under tariff preferences. So in some cases, it's totally duty-free, and in some cases, there is a tariff preference. So it's very important to us, and they will expire, one in 2019 and 2020. And I want to give the country the assurance and give the businesses that export to those markets the assurance that we are, in fact, working on these arrangements. We have been having discussions with the U.S. Trade Representative on these two matters, and the whole process has begun. And I give the assurance again of these agreements being renewed. As I said before, very, very important agreement, and especially for the export of our ammonia, or LNG, or methanol, or urea. But not only for those energy products, but also for products from Angostura, from KC Confectionery, from Trinidad Cement, Matux, Electrical Industries Group, and so on. But it's the work of the ministry, and we will ensure that these two agreements are in fact renewed. There are a lot of other measures, and I'm not going to go into too much detail on those, that support the increased export of goods. Certainly the Research and Development Fund, which we launched last year, and which is doing well. I mean, 3 firms have already benefited from it. This is, again, aimed to support and stimulate investment in new and advanced technology and so on. We want to ensure that countries take advantage of this kind of support so that they can develop new products, innovate new processes, systems, services, etc., which will distinguish our products based on quality. There's also the grant fund facility again. I've spoken about this before, and I don't think I need to go into it again. But certainly largely SMEs, small and medium-sized businesses in the area of light manufacturing and in the area of agro-processing have begun to benefit from this grant for the purchase of machinery and equipment. And this is geared to particular sectors: cocoa, coffee, chocolate processing, local beverages, wood and furniture, and so on. And there are two companies have benefited, but there are 6 in the pipeline, and we want companies to approach us to benefit from this grant fund facility. But I hasten, Madam President, because there are other things that I want to talk about that I didn't get a chance to speak of when I was in the lower house. And one of the things is our new trade policy, which will guide the work of the ministry from 2018 to 2022. I spoke about it, and I had hoped by now it would have been completed. It's not, but the work has begun. It has been done by ECLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, and substantial work has begun in terms of discussions with stakeholders. Some surveys are ongoing, and so on. And we've had some discussion in the ministry as well. I've seen a little bit of a first draft, but I mean, there's much more work to be done on it. But I'll tell you why. This thing is instrumental. Again, if we keep, we know that the energy sector will play a significant role in our economy for years to come. It's our natural resource, and it will continue. But we cannot continue to rely on the energy sector alone, and therefore we would have made some advances this year, certainly in our increased activity in the manufacturing sector, but we've got to focus and continue the work to ensure that we have these increased revenue streams from other areas in the economy. But in this case, in terms of the country's exports and so on. So largely, this policy will be aimed at enhancing and diversifying the country's economy, and also enhancing and diversifying the country's exports, and increasing its earnings of foreign exchange, and of course the overall revenue. Again, the objective is to transform our exports to ensure that the country produces high-value goods and services where global demand is growing. I'll tell you why this is so important. We have to look at the future of our goods trade, and therefore, in doing so, we have to look at the goods that we produce. Yes, the quality, but can we depend solely on the old goods that we are producing? That is the goods that we've been producing for the last 5 years and 10 years. And I'm telling you that if we have to have any growth at all, and manufacturers and business people ought to hear this, we have to move away from the old products. Well, I mean, we continue doing some of them if it is that they can find suitable markets, but we certainly have to look at the development of new products. And so therefore, when we speak of diversification, we have to speak of diversification in terms of our exports into new product areas. We also have to speak to diversification into new markets. So, as I said, it can't be the same old, it has to be about new products, yes, new products, maintaining the old markets, but we got to look at new products. The whole question, new markets as well. The whole question, I can tell you, in the new trade policy, the question of trade complementarity will be addressed. And yes, we can talk about the fact that there are 60 destination markets for all of our goods and so on. But again, if we're talking about increased revenue streams and increased exports and increased foreign exchange earnings, we've got to go beyond that. We have to take our goods beyond the USA, beyond the CARICOM countries. And what is still disappointing, as I said, we're doing the work, but only 5% of our goods go into the Latin American market, and that has to grow. So this hence the reason for the discussion on trade complementarity, which will be highlighted. We want to know what all of those new trading partners will require of us, what kind of goods they are importing elsewhere that we could possibly import. That's the kind of work that is going on now. So we know what the opportunities are, which products we produce, and for which markets. That's the study, and we'll be able to speak to And therefore, when we actually finish with this with this policy and it's out in the public arena, we would be going into detail about what products, what markets, what new products. And so we really invite, then we would invite the private sector to really think of the opportunities that are there. And again, as I said, we really, I think I've said about the new markets, new goods and so on. The other thing is we have to also ensure that we will remain competitive, paying attention, yes, new products, new markets, paying attention to pricing, paying attention to quality as well. And that's where, again, a lot of our other support mechanisms come into place. And again, I'm talking about our grant fund facility and so on. I'm talking about our foreign exchange facility at the Exim Bank, support for manufacturers. Another, I'm not going into much detail on it, but another idea or another point that would be developed in our trade policy is the whole question of global value chains. Again, we have to look at it because expansion in global production and trade is important, but again, the fragmentation in production processes present opportunities as well for production and for participating in different segments of the actual output product. And therefore, we have to begin to look at that as well, not only producing the final product, but the segmentation and producing part of being a part of the process, and all of those present opportunities. So as a government, we have to look at what we are thinking of calling the regionalization of production, and what our part is, what perhaps the responsibility of another country is as well. That would allow us some participation in this whole global value chain. But very important, but if we're thinking about growing our exports, trade complementarity, global value chains is where our thinking has to be. And I'll be very pleased to begin to expound on those things later in the year when the policy is finalized. So we talk about growing our goods exports, but something that we don't talk about enough is growing our services exports. And it is that the services sector has tremendous potential to contribute positively to the growth and sustainable development of the economy. And why? Because the services industry is labor intensive, and growth in services can therefore provide many more employment opportunities. Services, while they contribute, I think, to close to 60% of our GDP, exports of services is just about 10%. So it is rather minuscule. And this suggests that much of the services which are produced in our country is really for domestic consumption rather than for export. And we're really failing to capitalize on the opportunities that are there to export our key services. And I'm talking about a myriad of services, including energy and so on. So again, looking globally, the trade in services has really increased and is growing rapidly. And my research tells me is that it's growing faster than the trade in goods. So we got to be serious about it, and we have to look at that as well. And so much so that going forward in all of the international agreements that we're working on, this whole export services component and the export of services has to be an integral part of it. Globally, those industries that have been growing are like accounting and management consulting, and these are real opportunities for persons who are engaged in these areas. Public relations, research and development, travel, transportation, those are the really real areas of growth globally. So we do have the opportunity, and we do have the potential. We're an educated population. We do have the potential to benefit from this area, and therefore it is that I think we must embark on an aggressive agenda of building the export capability of the services subsectors. And when I say so, the services subsectors, I'm talking about the financial services, the maritime services, and tourism services, the creative industry services, education services.
Ma'am, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Ma'am, President,
Yeah.
can I ask a question? As you speak about exporting services, and you touch on exactly where I was going, we have a very educated cadre of population, so to speak. We have a situation where we have a lot of doctors who are not employed. Is there some way that can be also exported as part of the exporting of services?
Yes. And certainly it's an area for of export as well, healthcare services as well. And also it's an area of earning of revenue for us here. Even with the Cuba Hospital, which is going to be renamed as what is known as the Cuba Hospital as well, will in fact be the export of health services. That is something that we have actually decided on that particular institution. So yes, health services or doctors can in fact export their services. When we talk about maritime services and so on, we are in fact doing it. When we embark on the ship repair and dry docking and so on, we are developing the services sector. When we speak to Sandals, we are developing the tourism services sector. That is what counts to the GDP, but we have to speak about exporting our energy services sector as well. So all of those doctors, yes, their services can in fact be exported as well. Yachting, we talk about the yachting services as well. When yachting, the entry of yachts to Trinidad and Tobago has increased by 25%. We are in fact developing the yachting services sector as well. The creative industries, again, a development of the services sector as well. But we have to look beyond that, beyond the local consumption to what we can export. And I think the one that really comes to us easily is the energy sector in terms of what the cadre that we have built up over the years. And no doubt about it, we will have to be concerned about the kinds of agreements we make with countries with relative to taxation and so on. Those are things that we have to sit down and work out with regard to that again. But the point about it is we have started doing the work. It means that we have to work closer with the Trinidad and Tobago coalition of services. I haven't seen the synergy in the relationship as yet, but we have to ensure that we begin to work to the country's advantage. This is a sector which is so important, yet still it's badly regulated. So we have to work on even that aspect of the services sector as well. So in the ministry, we have developed a draft services policy. However, I've kept it back because I wanted to sit well within the new trade policy. I want to just speak to the question of diversification because the opposition speaks to that quite a bit. I'm going to skate through it though because there are other things I want to talk about. Again, we talked about the manufacturing sector. We're pleased about the growth in the manufacturing sector. You go to page 80, it details everything. There's been a 7.3% in terms of the overall 7.3%, but certainly in food, beverages, and tobacco products, growth by 5.62%. We're pleased about that. And in terms of petroleum and chemical products, growth of 9%. And as I believe is on account of natural gas availability, we're very pleased about that as well. But this sector is one that is mature and that can continue to grow. I mean, already being responsible for 60,000 jobs and indirect jobs, perhaps another 60,000. So very, very important that we worked to improve the sector, give the support to the manufacturing sector. We are listening to them, and hence the reason we have done that new product, which is how could I forget, the foreign exchange, the incremental foreign exchange facility. But we've seen, in terms of the areas of growth in the non-energy, in the manufacturing sector, in terms of our exports. The manufacture of bakery products increased by 13%. Manufacture of export of malt, liquors and malt, soft drinks, etc., 20% increase. Chemicals and chemical products, 11% increase, and so on. So it's there, but again, I mean, this is a sector that that has to be a little bit more robust. And it also has to be globally competitive. It has to be a little bit more innovative. As I said before, we're looking for new products that we can take to new markets that our partners, products that our partners are importing from other countries and that perhaps we can do here. I mean, we're looking for products that will utilize technologies and environmentally sound practices. So we're going to continue to work with the manufacturing sector, building it out, listening to the manufacturers. I'm pleased that we'll be able to in this last budget, to announce the incremental foreign exchange tax earnings tax credit. I think it will go a long way in supporting manufacturers. It will be implemented in fiscal 2019. And again, it's based on incremental exports only. There's legislation to be put in. I can give this honourable House, a guarantee that this will be done soonest to the advantage of the manufacturers. With regard to, again, I spoke about this in the lower house, but it's worth mentioning again, the new economic spaces, very, very important. The new project which we're doing, Senator Melissa Ramkissoon spoke to, the Phoenix Park Industrial Estate, which really will buffer all of the other work that is being done in the southern region in particular. This is an exciting project. And it will provide a space for the extension and the growth of the manufacturing sector. And when we talk again, I come back to the new products, looking beyond the food and beverage that we seem to be comfortable. Doing, but looking at more of a space that will encourage more industrialized products, if you could call it that. It's almost like I think we're looking at a new wave of industrialization, and this government has always come up with the right things that you need to do at the right time in terms of the configuration of our economy. And therefore, when we thought about doing this Phoenix Park Industrial Estate, we started negotiating with the Chinese who are going to do it, the Beijing construction group work. We, alongside that main the main agreement, we sought to enter an agreement with them. It hasn't been concretized as yet, that they should bring 10 Chinese firms into the park. And again, it's because we want to introduce another level of manufacturing. And in this case, there's been some interest in glass powder manufacturing and paper converting, wood processing, and so on, in food, integrated housing manufacturing. We have to look at new products that they, as I said,
Minister, you have 5 more minutes.
Yes. That the global market requires. So this is a very, very important project for us. Also the Moruga Agro-Processing and Light Industrial Park, again, which adds another dimension to diversified products being developed, because you're talking now about agro-processing. So we're looking for the kinds of value-added products that you can get from cassava and fish and pineapple and fruits and cocoa and so on. Again, when we talked about that aluminum industry, development of the aluminum industry, which we started in 2009, it's another wave of products. But yes, we do some activity in aluminum, but you're talking about some roof sheeting and pipes and so on. We have to go beyond that, and hence the reason that we are getting into these new aluminum products, and that's going to be quite an exciting project. Let me just say that one of the areas that we're going to pay continued attention to, and I think the government has done very well, is in fact the maritime industry. We've spoken at length about that, the growth in the yachting sector. Again, we're going to pay a lot of attention to the creative industries, which has been doing well, but which we know can grow because the world market is quite extensive. So we're going to pay attention to the music industry, which we've been doing through the Live Music District program, through the Artist Development program, through the Music Technology platform, and through the Music Export Academy. again, the fashion industry as well, extensive job creation. Our bespoke tailoring industry has been very successful. Our fashion value chain investment program, again, a great success, and we're going to continue this in 2018, another hybrid version of it. But again, through all of these fashion sector programs, 4 of them in all, the number of persons were trained last year, 90 persons, and we're hoping to have this, and we will have this increase. Again, in the film sector, we are going to continue to promote film, but I think this year we have some exciting projects in terms of promoting Trinidad and Tobago as a destination for making film, as well as improving the ease of business within the film industry. Again, spending some time on film festival partnerships and stakeholder engagement, and also, again, utilizing our film rebate program to attract both local and foreign film as well. We are working on improving the business environment, and I'm going to speak more to that when I get the opportunity in Parliament. But much work is being done on the extended single electronic window project, and there are many gains to be gained to be got from this extension, including the business process re-engineering of and other business reform achievements as well. Working on a national quality policy, again, to improve the types of products that we produce and to ensure that they are in fact competitive. Madam President, our investments by the local, our local businesses continue to be important for the growth of the economy. We're very pleased with our dynamic private sector, but we want the private sector to understand the central role which they too have to play in achieving sustained economic growth and poverty reduction, so that the government will continue to have dialogue with the private sector, again, to open up real possibilities, again, for fashioning the kinds of policy prescriptions that are absolutely necessary if we are to be serious about economic growth. Again, we will continue the policy framework, but we want the private sector to be involved, and we're going to be very, very focused on that engagement, ensuring that we work together to discover the goods and services that are really needed in the world market and that we can produce in Trinidad and Tobago at a sufficiently low cost, Madam President, and take to the wider Caribbean, South and Central America, and so on. Madam President, with those few words, I want to thank you and give the assurance that the work of the Ministry of Trade and Industry will continue to assist in the development of the local economy. Thank you.
Senator Crease.
Thank you, Madam President. Before I give my substantive presentation, there were some issues which were raised by the Minister of National Security. She's not with us, but I would still want to at least put it on the record. He had indicated that the lifeguards are now under the Ministry of National Security. I remember when they were under the municipal corporations, local government system, and there were concerns at that time that the local politicians might have been interested in varying funds that essentially were intended for the lifeguard service to place in other aspects of the corporations. So there was a move afoot which succeeded to place the lifeguards back under tourism. And now I hear they are under national security, so I was wondering what's the rationale for the movement to national security. So if anyone could shed light on that now or later on in the debate, I would appreciate that. I also noticed his announcement that government is prepared to allow prison officers to keep and carry service firearms. And I have a concern. I appreciate the stress that prison officers are good. And this goes way back. I was familiar with the then Commissioner of Prison who was assassinated, Commissioner Hercules. Good. At that time, I was employed at the Office of the Ombudsman, and part of my schedule was taking complaints from prisoners as well as from people against the police, because there was no police complaints authority back then. So I am aware of the state of the prisons in terms of the preponderance of violence in that institution, being officially the place where corporal punishment and capital punishment is executed. And given who the normal residents are, the fact of the matter is that the prison officer comes under the general psychology, sociology of the place. And therefore, I often wondered when they leave there at the end of the day, whether they're able, when they take off their uniforms, to discharge the kind of persona that's involved in running, managing the prison system as we know it. And so that is why, if there's a move afoot to allow them, for their own protection, admittedly, to take their firearms home, I am concerned that measures are instituted that would ensure that the psychological fitness of any individual to keep and carry that firearm is appropriately provided for by way of the appropriate tests that can be carried out. So that, and I'm thinking of an incident involving some other armed state personnel that may have occurred somewhere in Grand Bazaar as one of the outcomes that we would not like to see happen. But as we speak of things that come out of the prison and may follow the prison officer home, one of the things that struck me, and I visited the prisons during the years 1985 to 1992. And I was surprised to learn that some of the conditions, most of the conditions that I was a witness to, still exist. And I'm referring here to the system with regard to the availability of modern toilets within the prison. I'm talking specifically about the use of toilet pails in a prison cell that has sometimes up to 9 people. And for those of us in our well-sanitized homes, we read the inscriptions on the toothbrushes, and they advise you always to keep them containerized because of the existence in your washroom facility of free radicals. So one could imagine what the average prison officer and prisoner and prison visitor is exposed to in a system where pails are still utilized. All I can hope at this stage is that in whatever budgetary provisions there are, that everything and anything is done to abolish that pail system. Because if you think in terms of the propensity for violence, we are sitting on a time bomb with regard to the prison system. With the propensity for disease, I don't know how, and I always had doubts as to the efficacy of the Office of the County Medical Officers of Health, and now the Environmental Management Authority, if that pail system could still, in 2018, be in existence. Then we have all, in the society, fallen drastically asleep. But there is no way, when it strikes, that will be less than devastating, the potential for cholera and the related chain of diseases that come out of that kind of system in this here time. But to return to the substantive issues in the budget, and I want to focus mainly on the 6 major game changer points that are listed in the budget statement 2019, and on pages 11 to 16, and to compare these to the 9 points of Vision 2030 that relates to the Vision 2030 report. The first, of course, relates, they speak here of the 6 major game changers, and the first at the list, of course, relates to the strengthening of the gas-based economy. And by this, they're referring to the negotiations that apparently have been successful for access to Venezuela's Dragon Field reserve. The thing about that, and I compare this to the absence of any serious reference to the whole question of diversification under the 6 major game changer points, is the question of risk management. Trinidad, just being some 7 miles away at the closest point from Venezuela, has always been the first to know the possibility of political change, or what is the nature of the political change sweeping Venezuela. Most of us forget at one point in time during his lifetime when he was involved in what has now come to be known as the Bolivarian Revolution, the creation of the Bolivarian Union of States. Simón Bolívar resided in Port of Spain. I've been shown the actual place where he lived while he was here, while he was ostensibly cooling his heels when Venezuela got too hot for him to be stationed there. So the question arises, now that there's an influx of Venezuelans who have found Venezuela too hot to continue to reside there, what is the level of risk that the question of political stability of the current regime in Venezuela, what is the level of risk that our access to the Dragon Field exposes any developments downstream of that? What is the level of risk that's involved? And I heard no mention throughout the debate to that question. And one would think that it is standard business practice to assess the level of risk that a business is exposed to. And until those statistics and there are probability curves and so on for calculating that within the business world, until our bright boys with the MBAs and so on share that information, share that analysis, I would hate to think that our government would be so irresponsible as to invest billions of dollars in a risky project like that. Because we are all busy talking about the billions of dollars that Petrotrin has been a sponge for, the infrastructure necessary for moving gas from that field to Phoenix, Point Lisas, wherever in Trinidad, runs into billions of dollars. And what is the level of risk that's involved? At any rate, on the wider question of diversification, it would appear to me that the ever-present and persistent monoculture, the plantation mode, Beckford's living nightmare, persists. Game changer 2, buoyancy of the capital market. Here reference is being made to the National Investment Fund and the $4 billion bond. And I often wonder, is it that our capital market is so buoyant? Or is it a question of the paucity of capital investment opportunity that everyone had no choice but to rush at the $4 billion bond? Which is it? Let's be honest now. Could that money have found its way into the capital market, onto our stock exchange? No way, Jose. Because those who have good shareholdings in that market hold on to them. And then there are the companies that are successful that are not available on the stock exchange. So what is really this local capital market that is buoyant? Surely we are kidding ourselves. There's no buoyancy in our local capital market. But that brings us to the broader philosophical question as to what are the underpinnings, what are the perspectives that the state has, and the whole question of ownership and control. Are we still at the stage where we are celebrating the state's ownership or local ownership of the commanding heights of the economy? Have we evolved beyond that position? You know, and I thought of that when initially Roger, the President General of OWTU, responded by saying that they're not in the business of owning the refinery. That actually his point was that they were more interested in leasing. But whatever OWTU's position, my question is, what is the state's position? What is their grounded philosophy? Because I would expect that position to be enunciated. And then whatever project we find ourselves in is downstream of that philosophy, as opposed to the vagaries of whatever comes our way and a kind of happenstance philosophy. I have a problem with that. The thing about it is, and that brings me to point 2 in terms of the question of solving and preventing crime. What's the vision for Marabella, Pointe-a-Pierre, Gasperillo, and even slightly further north, always in the news, Claxton Bay? Claxton Bay makes the news, and it's the byline from the police station, inevitably. Have we considered what the real fallout from the whole in Pointe-a-Pierre to those fence line communities? Are we on the verge of Hunger March Road 2? And then there's point 3, which speaks to attitudes and behaviors and poor work ethos. What are we doing when the state clearly wrongly and soundly publicly trashes the OWTU. What are we doing to the young males? What are we saying to them? What is the effect on the quote-unquote work ethic when we put these people unplanned onto the breadline? Because you see, we keep focusing on the numbers of employees. And I felt for Senator Ramkissoon as an employee of Petrotrin. But the employees are largely catered for by the union agreement. There's a minimum threshold under which they won't fall, come what may. But what of the casual workers? What of the workers with the contractors? As we go further afield, what message are we sending to them who are operating on the fence line to dare work ethos? And we come to game changer 3, restructuring of Petrotrin itself. Or is that the abandonment of refining as oil refining as an industry? And that takes me back immediately to Caroni 1975, all over again. Are we in effect throwing out the baby with the bathwater? Have we really taken the time to read Lashley's report? Or are we glossing it over? Is Lashley at any point saying that we should close down the refinery? I have read the report and I have not seen that. That probably in the appendix. The appendix to the appendix, probably. So are we going to end up like Angostura? Because Angostura imports bulk rubber, puts a label on it. Is that where we are going? What's the company name? Paria Heritage. Will they be imported fuel just like Angostura imports rum? Is that the vision that's envisaged in those 9 points? Is that how we intend to expand exports by importing? Is that how we intend to increase the foreign exchange? Brings you back to the question as to what is the state's role in the economy? Commanding heights of the economy? It would appear that we are so steeped in the old culture of primary production and redistribution. Because you name it, that's what amongst the business by and large in Trinidad and Tobago. That merchant marine class, as opposed to genuine entrepreneurial activity. There is a moneyed class here that's really entrenched in the distributive trades and fights to be the agent for the distributor of having the, when they have the KFC or the Dairy Queen, the franchise. Distributive trades, not really a productive entity. Is this the new vision? The state is going to enter into that? Because they're telling you that there are really 3 aspects to what Petrotrin used to do. Exploration and drilling, terminaling, which is receiving, whatever the ships bring in, and, of course, refining. Now, terminaling, what is the state doing in terminaling? Are we a socialist state? I have no problem with that, but I need to know. Because if we are a socialist state, fine. Because that must really be commanding heights of the economy. And the thing is, capital being as underdeveloped as it is, the state, whenever it has its hands on capital, has to have a priority listing of what are we going to do with this scarce resource. And it cannot be that being in the business of redistribution, merchant marine activity, is that what the state is going to take all those scholarship winners and the MBA holders to do? Come on.
Senator Chris, I'll probably respond in a little more detail when I speak. But you have to understand evolution of business, You're talking 1970s economics. Do you know right now in the LNG value chain, the most money is made by the traders? Not by the producers of gas, not like by the midstream who is making LNG, not from the FOB price at point. The traders, that's the negotiations behind with BP and Shell now to see how we can bring back value from the traders into Trinidad. But I'll give you a better discourse on Monday.
I think you have missed my point. My point is that what the state is finding itself doing as opposed to nationals of Trinidad and Tobago? Because the state is not a national of Trinidad and Tobago, There is such a thing as the private sector. So that is why I need to know what is the state's core philosophy. Is it that we are a socialist state? If you're saying we are a socialist state, fine, I have no problem. The state will do everything, and we'll all work for the state. Yeah. But if we are not a socialist state, if we are a mixed economy, we need to be clear. What are we, fish or fowl? I'm not denying that there are returns to be had in the enterprise, Clearly, if there are millionaires in Trinidad, and as I said, they were largely a merchant marine class, it means they're largely doing redistribution. Then I'm not denying the existence of profits and profitability of such an activity. The question is, what is the state doing there? Is the state in competition with its citizens? What is the model that the state has adopted as a principled position? I'm not saying they have to be back where we were in 1970 when we were trying to get certain multinationals out. But whatever we are, we must agree that that is what we are. Correct. And these activities would follow as a result of that. So if we are a communist state, we'll do X. If we are a socialist state, we'll do Y. If we are a capitalist state, we'll do X, Y, or Z. But first we must know who or what we are. That must be abundantly clear. And that is not. So is the state in the business of competing with its own nationals in the distributive trades? Is the state going to corner up for itself these lucrative cash cows? Is that our philosophy? I am saying once we agree on what the philosophy is, then all of us would know what to wear to the dance. But you can't be playing games with the rules. Because the politics of convenience is a dangerous politics to me. And to that extent, yes, the thinkers of the 70s, the best, the Beckfords, the Eric Williams even, and the Dimases, clearly are frowning down upon us. Because surely we have lost our way. In a sense, Delano de Coto is right. The late Abdul Malik, the motto Vision Eye is closed. and the business of dreaming has ceased. And when I looked at Wednesday's Express, Wednesday of this week, and I read the article by Clyde Weatherhead, and the point he was making about the timeline involved in the registration of these companies, one wonders whether there was any sincerity in the offer to WTO or to any other national, personal institution to make an offer for the refinery. That timeline does not lend credence that that was, in fact, a genuine offer. And the response since seems to compound to affirm that notion that there is no intention to treat with whatever OWTO has to offer on that question. So that the broader issue of consultation, and I will be first to admit OWTO is just one stakeholder. Everyone over the age of 18 in Trinidad and Tobago is a stakeholder in Petrotrin. The employees, like the senator, the union, the fence line communities, and I, for all my life, have lived fence line community of Petrotrin, myself a former employee of Tesoro, born in Faizawad, still living there. You see, there is an assault, as it were, on labor. And not labor purely as an institution, but labor also as people. Because the implications for fence line communities are implications for credit unions and all who do business with them. And there are some 450,000 credit union accounts. And there's double counting there because people are members of more than one credit unions. But the credit union in the state sector, and particularly the oil sector, the numbers are high, and the investments are even higher. And in credit union month, this is going down. And there seems to be an extent to which it would appear that government is in tandem with some re-emerging negative attitudes to labor, and particularly industrial relations, and in particular the industrial court has come under attack. You know, and at each critical point in our history, the axe always seems to fall on labor. And in Vision 2030.4, the question, and I quote, of constitutional and institutional reform comes up. So whether the industrial court, are they to be a target of constitutional and institutional reform? Our labor leaders to end up like Butler and Weeks under the ISA and the IRA? Is there validity in the concern that after Roger is Remy? But before we get to Duke, Remy wears two caps. The names don't really matter. It's the position. It's the position. Because the other cap he wears is a credit unionist. it is the same people. Because I have to work somewhere, and then I join a trade union, and then I join a credit union, and I get my employer to send the deductions to the two institutions. But it's one person. That's why I said in the 500,000 or so accounts, there is obvious double counting. But there is a person at the back of each account. And these persons have participated in trade unions, who in turn around and create credit unions. PSU is a product of PSA. After the time I left the service, the computer printout still said PSA Credit Union, when we had gone through 3 iterations of that name. After Petrotrin is TSTT, my friends tell me. But I worry too much about the fence line communities, because at page 15 of the budget statement, they say, and I quote, "We are taking steps to ensure that the workers are appropriately compensated with due regard to their welfare and that of their families." The aloofness of that tone. All I can say to the workers, listen, the OWTU has set the stage for that already. But the aloofness of that tone, it sounds like a report coming out of the Moyne Commission after some trouble in the colonies, and they send down the guys, to come and do the whitewash job and keep the natives, the restive natives, quiet. They think we've come full circle. You see, it's the contractors and their workers, it's all the casual workers, the doubles vendors, the mobile food peddlers, even the maintenance warrants in the magistrate court.
Senator Crease, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. Everybody is really on the fence line. And they will be soon lining up to pluck the green fowl. Because the dashing bush, things go up, things go down, the dashing bush is still there. Then we come to Game Changer 4. And this is all about the Sandals project. At budget statement, page 15. I don't have the Constitution to really read that section, except into the Hansard record, except to note the number of rooms. There are going to be 1,000 rooms. Good? Is this Magdalena all over again? If you take the name out on the number of rooms, it will sound like the Magdalena brochure. It's almost sickeningly myopic. You see, the Sandals idea could make sense if the level of food production, if the level of readiness of the Tobago economy to absorb Sandals is there. But what the crisis with the sea bridge pointed to is that all the food coming from Trinidad. So who is prepared at a moment's notice to pick up that slack, to take up those contracts with the hotels for the supply of whatever that 1,000 rooms would demand? Is it going to be the local farmer? Is anything in the budget presentation last year or this year assures us that local farming is there and ready to go, to run with this thing, to get the benefits, whatever they are from Sandals? You see, the Sandals situation makes you ask the question, the airport expansion is for who? Tobago or Sandals? The harbour expansion is for who? Tobago or Sandals? The quick acquisition of the fast ferries is for who? Tobago or Sandals? It comes unraveled. It could be perceived for what it is. So what then with all these projects to support Sandals? What is the real cost of the Sandals project? $2.7 billion. You have to add up all these other projects to get the cost of the Sandals project. It is not the nominal construction figure. And what is the impact to add to the cost? What is the impact of a 1,000-room hotel on the fragile ecosystem that is Tobago? What is the impact? And in all the points they're talking about environmental sustainability, is EMA ready to play their part? Game Changer 5 talks about the dry dock facility, shipbuilding program, about 2,700 direct jobs and 13,000 indirect jobs and so on. And that, of course, this is going to be the Chinese, another Chinese project. Well, the Malaysia PM has a concern. The Malaysia leadership says, listen, the Chinese always want to bring their own labor and to bring their own materials for the projects. So what's left for the local country? He turned down quite a few Chinese projects on those grounds. And then the transfer of skills. Our recent experience with that fast fleet and the transfer of skills in the management of the ship tells us that we do not have presently within the shipping sector the capacity to monitor that and ensure whatever skills they are to be transferred were in fact transferred with that ferry that had departed quickly. The time it was here, we did not acquire the skills in running that ship. I have little confidence that we will do so now. And that brings us, of course, to the sixth game changer, the whole question of the acquisition of fast ferries and whether this expensive acquisition feeds into a national plan.
Senator Crease, your time is up.
Thank you.
Senator De Freitas.
Thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to contribute to this budget presentation for the fiscal year 2018-2019. And this is my fourth budget presentation in this August House. And I intend in my presentation to focus on the theme of this year's budget, which is turnaround. Now, Madam President, after following all of the discourse that usually takes place post-budget reading in the other place, I think it's safe to say that there is some skepticism about the theme of this year's budget, and that's not to be unexpected. I remember in the first budget presentation that we had, where we were talking about the economic downturn that this country was facing, there was skepticism then. So I find it ironic that 4 years later, when we speak to a turnaround where we are exiting this economic downturn, that you're seeing skepticism, especially in the public domain and in the other place in relation to that. But Madam President, it is the level of skepticism that I heard today from members opposite that left me baffled. And Senator Haynes spoke to gaslighting. And I have to ask the question, Madam President, that when you engage in the largest expenditure in this nation's history with no return on investment or value for money, then telling us to stop talking about it, to that's old news. Isn't that not gaslighting? Failed project after failed project after failed project. No accountability, no apology, but telling us that we have no vision and that we have no plan. And all of a sudden, when we stabilize the economy and finally project a positive growth, and magically a plan appears that they have a plan for the future. Madam President, is that not gaslighting? No. So, Madam President, Senator Haynes spoke to psychological warfare. But I want to remind this nation that there are only two psychological terms needed when listening to members opposite. And the first is that you cannot solve a problem from the same mindset that created it. And perhaps the most telling statement towards that came from Senator Mark today, where he indicated that this government engaged in a savage cut in expenditure which had dire effects on the citizens. Now tell me, after what they did in 2010 to 2015, what recourse did they leave to anybody coming in from the 2015 period? How were you to stabilize this economy if you didn't engage in expenditure cuts? I remember that one of the skepticisms that was leveled against this administration in that first budget presentation is that we were not cutting large enough and we were not cutting fast enough. So I say that to say, Madam President, that they are still engaging in the exact same mindset that got us into this problem in the first place. Madam President, the second psychological terminology that I want this nation to remember when dealing with the opposition is that it is not the same day that a green leaf drops in water that it rots. And that speaks to the fact that the activities of 2010 to 2015 did not have its effect in 2010 to 2015. The effects of those activities came after. So, Madam President, the reason that we keep reminding this nation is because a man who forgets the mistakes of his past is doomed to repeat them. And this country cannot afford the mistakes of 2010 to 2015 again. We will not survive it. So, Madam President, I sympathize with members opposites. You see, they have to rebut against what is a positive achievement of this administration in relation to turning around the economy. You see, they never expected that we would be able to do it in a 5-year period. They expected to go into the elections with a downturn in the economy so that they could sell doom and gloom to gain political mileage. But, Madam President, I have to say that the one thing that they did not cater for is the mastermind that is the Minister of Finance, the intelligence that is the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, and the leadership capabilities of the Prime Minister of this country. So I, for one, support the Minister of Finance and the Minister in the Ministry of Finance. And as I go through my observations, I will explain why.
I'm hearing your voice above that of the speaker. Please continue.
So, Madam President, as I indicated, I support the Ministry of Finance. And
Amin, please, I'm still hearing you. Continue, Senator.
thank you, Madam President. You see, what happens, Madam President, is when the truth strikes like lightning, you must bring the thunder, and they cannot accept it. So, Madam President, the first thing I did, outside of the numbers and review of the economy that usually accompanies a budget presentation, is to look back to see what progress is being made in relation to previous budgets that would justify a turnaround. When I did this, I noticed that the theme put forward did not just apply to the numbers and financial criteria when determining the health of an economy, but I looked to the social and human factors as well. Most importantly, Madam President, I looked to the response to the people who govern, as in, are we implementing what we say we're going to? Or is the public, of which we are all a part, and to whom the budget applies, also understanding of where we are and what needs to be done so that we may progress as a nation? You see, Madam President, in order to progress as a nation, we must remember from where we came. We must be true to ourselves. We must learn from the mistakes of our past. Last year's budget was themed Changing the Paradigm, meaning that we had to change the way we think if we were to emerge from the economic circumstances that we found ourselves in. What we had to change specifically was 2 scenarios. The first was the mentality of increasing expenditure even in the face of declining revenues. And the proof of that change came on September the 7th, 2015, to the benefit of all in this nation. Madam President, the second was, and this is where the understanding of the citizenry and the patience of the citizenry came into play, and that was the reduction of expenditure to meet revenue. And you would remember that Senator Sri Kisoon, in the opening comments of his budget presentation today, spoke to that in great detail. And Madam President, you may recall that it was the same Senator Sri Kisoon in another contribution, I think it was the mid-year review, somewhere around 2016, that made a statement that stuck with me all this time. And what he spoke to was that the problem we face is that we are trying to reduce expenditure whilst revenue is also declining. And at the time, revenue was declining faster than expenditure. And it is at that point, Madam President, that I understood that in order to achieve the turnaround that we have gotten to today, it will require not just leadership and vision, but more importantly, the strength of will to do what is necessary, even if it meant it wasn't popular. So, Madam President, the turnaround as indicated in this year's budget is as a function of consistent efforts to reduce expenditure and increase revenue. And as such, I want to touch briefly on two issues that have dominated the discussion surrounding the budget that are focused on reducing expenditure. The first being that of Petrotrin. Now, Madam President, I'm not an energy expert. Let me just put that disclaimer there one time. And I leave the specifics to the energy experts in the room. But like most citizens, reading all that is in the public domain and trying to make sense of it all, this is what I have come to understand. The issue regarding Petrotrin and its lack of profitability did not happen overnight. It is something that has been happening over time, and for whatever reason, treating with it head-on has been put off time and time again. The proverbial can has been kicked down the road. The problem with that, Madam President, is that at some point you have to pick up the can and treat with it. You cannot kick it down the road forever. And given the economic circumstance that we found ourselves in, we must reduce expenditure and we must find ways to increase revenue. It just so happens that that time is now. However, that now poses another problem, which is in treating with it, you find yourself between a rock and a hard place. The decision to restructure could not have been an easy decision to make. And the reason that I know this is because it's not politically expedient to do so, and there's no political mileage to be gained. But there is a benefit to the country. And that is how a change in paradigm leads to a turnaround. Because for the first time, we are seeing where a government is putting country first. This is why I said, Madam President, in order to achieve the turnaround, it requires a strength of will to do what is necessary to the benefit of all, even if it is unpopular. Madam President, to put the emotions, feelings, and decisions surrounding this issue into a context that I think everyone can understand, let me use an analogy. You wake up one morning and there's a pain in your leg, noticeable but not annoying. You go about your life as normal, thinking nothing of it, as most would. You're thinking that it's going to go away. And as time passes, could be years, it could be months, you learn to ignore it, maybe even live with it. There comes a point where you cannot ignore it anymore. It's too painful to walk. You go to the doctor, who after his tests gives you the bad news. It's cancer. He has to operate and remove the leg in order to save your life. You have a decision to make. You go through the emotions. You don't want to lose your leg. You've had it since birth. You've learned to walk with it, play sports with it. How are you going to live? What is your quality of life going to be? But you're between a rock and a hard place. Because if you don't lose the leg, you lose your life and there will be no quality of life to speak of. So, Madam President, that sounds eerily familiar to some of the sentiments I've heard since this decision was announced. You have a part of the business that is losing money, that if allowed to continue, threatens the economy, threatens the turnaround, threatens the country. A decision has to be made that isn't easy. The sentiments that I've read and heard center around heritage. We heard Senator Mark talk about patrimony today. It centers around history, and that you must find a way because we are accustomed to having it this way. And in the same way that the doctor understands what has to happen, knows that it's never an easy thing to go through, and operates with the patient's best interest in mind, so too, Madam President, Trinidad and Tobago has a doctor at its helm that cares about this country and with the intention of doing no harm operates without fear or favor to the benefit of all in this country, even those that are directly affected by this decision. Madam President, in this budget presentation, in relation to those directly affected, the Ministry of Finance has indicated the provision of approximately $2.6 billion, consisting of $1.8 billion for all employees under the separation packages in 9 collective agreements, $555 million in back pay for all employees, $203 million in vacation pay for all employees, and $30 million in ex gratia payments for all contingent employees. This is on top of the 2 pension plans, which are both fully funded with a combined asset value of $10.7 billion and still expected to meet all of the obligations and liabilities. Madam President, I have had the experience of living in a developed country during a period of economic downturn that led to companies being forced to restructure. And I can tell you that the feelings expressed by employees are the same as it would be anywhere such a thing happens. What I noticed, though, about the employees is that they always fell into 3 categories. And it's not that there wasn't other categories. It is just that when I listened to friends and family of friends and those that I interacted with, I discovered that there were always 3 major categories that they fell into. And the first one were those who, for one reason or the other, found themselves working in an industry that they did not intend. But because the money was good, or simply because they were comfortable, they chose to stay and make a career of it. These individuals, when faced with a loss of job, responded by saying, "I would have preferred not to have been let go at all," as anybody would say. But the circumstances have given me an opportunity to do what I always wanted to do, to follow my dreams. Some would have transitioned into another industry, the one they always wanted to be in. Others would have gone back to school, and some would have started a business. The second category, Madam President, were those who were being much older and who spent, for all intents and purposes, a full career with the company and were not long from retirement. Their usual response was to travel, spend more time with family. Pretty much they saw the job loss as early retirement. But it is the last group that was the one that had the hardest time. These were the ones that had the skill sets, were still relatively young, wanted to be in the industry that they were in. These were the ones that the presidents and prime ministers spoke to when they talk about job creation in other sectors, in other countries, to counter the job losses in another. But Madam President, this is all those leaders could have spoken to, because there wasn't any severance packages, back pay, vacation pay, or ex gratia payment. There was no pension plan to speak of. The most that some of these individuals would get, depending on what level they were in the company, if it was private or whether it was public, is something called a golden parachute, but you had to be at a CEO level or above. But Madam President, in Trinidad and Tobago, because we understand and sympathize, not only would you find these things for those directly affected, but as the Ministry of Finance indicated, you will find that there's a concerted effort to have job creation in other industries to which these individuals can transition to once those projects come online. And Madam President, I quote from the budget presentation, the China Harbour and NIDCO Maritime Project in La Brea and the increased drilling and production works being undertaken by Petrotrin will bring additional opportunities for the former employees for jobs as fitters, electricians, assemblers, welders and mechanics, technical craftsmen, and for contractors and many other service companies in the emerging industries in the Southwest Peninsula. So you are seeing where, similar to developed countries, where at the level of CEOs and above, where they would get golden parachutes if there was retrenchment to take place or if that person had to exit, you are seeing here where this administration is taking great care to ensure that these individuals who, due to the economic circumstances and the hard decisions that we have to make, are receiving the payments that are due to them. But secondary to that, we are focusing on creating jobs so that there is some transition into the future. So, Madam President, as I indicated, tough decisions had to be made. We do so with the benefit of the country in mind, but more importantly, taking into account those directly affected so as to soften the impact. Madam President, I now move forward to another expenditure-reducing initiative that has gotten much attention, and that is the reduction in gas subsidy, one that needs no further explanation as it is the item that people look forward to in the budget. Again, another decision that is not an easy one, that draws no political mileage, that has been kicked down the road for many a budget presentation across governments. All had the intent, but none had the will to implement, and one that we must now inevitably face. I'm looking at this particular issue in the context I outlined earlier in relation to the human factors that would indicate a turnaround, specifically understanding by the public. And Madam President, when we called for a change in the paradigm last year, and the subsidy was reduced for diesel and super, the response was a nationwide increase in taxi fares. This year, with the reduction of the subsidy for super alone, I have found a mixed response. And Madam President, I invite you to listen to an article in the Newsday dated Friday the 8th of October 2018 titled, "St. James Fare Remains at $5 as a Gift to the Public." And I quote, "Passengers going to St. James need not dig any deeper into their pockets, as taxi drivers have agreed to absorb the increase in price of super gasoline in this week's budget." Errol Alexander, president of the St. James Taxi Drivers Association, yesterday told Newsday his executive met earlier and agreed not to raise fares. "There is no need to, as the public did not get a raise," he said. "This is our Christmas gift to the traveling public." His association agreed to absorb the cost of the gas increase and to keep fares at $5. And I just want to say, Madam President, that you're starting to see where individuals in the...
Thank you very much. Madam President, in accordance with Standing Order 14.5, I beg to move that the Senate continue to sit until the completion of the presentation by Senator De Freitas.
Honourable Senators, the question is that the Senate continue to sit until the completion of the presentation by Senator De Freitas. Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The Senate will continue to sit until the completion of the presentation of Senator De Freitas.
Thanks again, Madam President. I continue along the point I was making, in the sense that the public, by way of the example of the president of the Taxi Association for St. James, indicating that they would not pass this raise on to the traveling public, I just want to actually refer to another article, which is similar, because I'm not just going to use one, which speaks to another route. And that particular article was in The Guardian, Tuesday, October the 16th, 2018, titled "Fare Increase Causes Division Among the Curep to Chaguanas Drivers." And I quote, "Commuters along the Curep to Chaguanas route are being advised not to pay the increased fare of $12. Instead, they are being urged to travel with drivers who are charging the current fare of $10, claiming there was a war brewing among the route drivers, as 97% of them were not in agreement with the proposed increase. Some of the drivers said they wanted to avoid imposing any further hardships on the traveling public." And Madam President, I'm saying that to say that you're seeing the change in mentality in relation to some of the initiatives that need to be taken in order to get us to the point of turnaround and beyond. But what I want to say at this point, Madam President, is that this particular initiative is not one that is set in stone, in the sense that it is one that people have to use one particular fuel. There are alternative fuels in Trinidad and Tobago. And as much as we've heard of CNG, and I've heard the argument where individuals do not like to use CNG, I, for myself, didn't understand why until I read the first article, which is the one that was in the Newsday that I spoke to. And it was the last paragraph in that article that really brought things into perspective for me. And that article says this: he reckoned, and this is Mr. Alexander, that the $55 per day he would usually spend to top up his tank each day to facilitate his trips would now increase to $70 or $80. Usually, $280 or $300 can be earned in fares from such a tank of gasoline, he said. On CNG, he said one or two association members had converted by installing CNG tanks. A driver can work a whole day on $12 tank of CNG gas, Alexander said. But some drivers don't want to use CNG because they don't want a CNG tank in their car trunk. And I'm saying, Madam President, that it seems that where you can increase profits for those who use this particular type of fuel, which is gasoline, by changing over to CNG, are not doing so because of a superficial thing, in the sense that they do not want the CNG tank in their trunks. And I'm saying, Madam President, that if it is that we have to go through this turnaround and get to the future, that we have to get to a mindset change. That is why the NGC earlier on this week is sponsoring 1,000 conversions to CNG, and I implore individuals, especially those who rely on fuel to generate income for the month, to engage the NGC in this sponsorship. So, Madam President, I want to go further to say from a national perspective that I look forward to the day that we change the way we think about the use of our vehicles, and I'm talking privately now. In light of the fact that expenditure on gas subsidy must be reduced and the resulting effect can be mitigated by individually reducing the expenditure we incur from excessive driving, I want to say that I'm not talking privately in relation to the daily commute. I think Senator Haynes would have spoken to that, or to the work, or to any usage related to family activities. What I'm talking about is the mindset that we must drive to everything. If it is one thing I know comes with sporting events, fetes, or any kind of public gathering in this country, in Trinidad and Tobago especially, is that it's massive traffic accompanies those events. And Madam President, as we continue to develop as a nation, I compare our progress to that of developed nations and the experiences I've had there. And I can tell you that the use of cars or vehicles is very different. Probably because there are a lot of associated costs with driving. Paying for parking is just one example. And of course, the fact that the price of their pumps fluctuates is another. And it is Senator Small that alluded to that when he was talking about utilities, when he was in, I think, Europe you were talking about, where he indicated that as soon as he got there, he realized that once you had to pay for something, your behavior changed. And so, Madam President, I'm just wondering if in the future, as the expenditure incurred through the gas subsidy is reduced, if there will be a corresponding increase or balancing of the use of the current public transport system in conjunction with cost-cutting measures like carpooling, not just for fetes or sporting events and public gatherings, but in our daily lives. So, Madam President, I now move on to revenue-generating initiatives, specifically as it relates to Tobago, simply because the biggest revenue-generating initiative is to ensure that Tobago's economy gets a much-needed boost, and this government has committed to do so in several ways. I will focus on three categories: revenue-generating projects, developing infrastructure on the island, and strengthening the sea bridge. Madam President, we all know about the Sandals project and the potential it has to be a catalyst to the tourism sector for Tobago and to be a job creator as well. We've heard all of the benefits in previous budget debates. Added to this, Tobago can now expect a marina, which in and of itself, like Sandals, would also be a catalyst to the tourism sector and a job creator for Tobago. This is something that has been promised to Tobago for a very long time, something that Tobago has been asking for a very long time, and is well on its way to becoming a reality under this administration to the benefit of all Tobagonians. And Senator Chris, just to answer your questions as to whether these things are coming up because of Sanders, as I just indicated, some of these things that are now coming up have been asked for by Tobago for years and never been implemented. We've gotten promises, but we've never gotten the kind of implementation. So I don't know if Sanders came first and then these things came, but I can tell you we've been asking for it, and Tobago is glad to get it, and we believe that this administration will be able to provide it where other administrations have failed. But Madam President, again, I would just say to Senator Chris and to the rest of members in this chamber, don't take my word for it, because anyone can make a promise regarding a project. Let us take a look at the track record of this administration in relation to Tobago. In previous budgets, it was promised that the police station at Old Grange and Roxborough would be done. Those are well on their way to completion and will be done in fiscal year 2019. In last year's budget, the Minister of Finance announced that there would be a discussion in relation to Tobago being able to borrow money for its development, something, again, that has been asked for years, for as long as I could remember, and promised without implementation. Madam President, I'm pleased to hear the Minister of Finance and the Minister in the Ministry of Finance say in this year's budget that that particular promise has been achieved, in that Tobago is now able to borrow up to $300 million to finance its programs and development on the island. This is in addition to the $1.055 billion allocated for expenditure in Tobago by various government ministries and statutory authorities. Madam President, if I was to stop there alone, that is a lot that has been done for Tobago by way of promises made projects and by way of things that have been given to Tobago. But Madam President, I'm not done. The airport terminal building, another promise by the previous government, one that had fallen on deaf ears, one whose lack of fulfillment caused airlines to pull out of Tobago if it wasn't fixed in time. Yet still that didn't cause decisive action by the previous government. All that was required then was an upgrade to what is there now. This administration is going one step further, and a new airport terminal is part of the plan to boost tourism and airlift to Tobago, one that can be expected to come to fruition. So, Madam President, I have left the best for last, a promise fulfilled, the Sea Bridge. For the last year, and I'm glad, Madam President, I'm very glad that they're laughing. Because for the last year we sat, and in response to our promises that we would fix and strengthen the bridge, we listened to claims of mistreatment of Tobago, claims that they were speaking out because they had nothing but love for Tobago, that they were friends of Tobago people, that the boat was not good enough, that it would not work, that there were security issues with the boat. Yet on the return of the Spirit to service, we heard no comments. On the first sailing of the Galleon's Passage, which signaled the end of the issue on the Sea Bridge, we heard not a squawk, not a bark, not a peep for those who said they cared. Madam President, I will tell you why. The faces of the first passengers on the maiden voyage of the Galleon's Passage drove the fear of political demise in their hearts. As their political credibility waned with each smiling face that exited on the port of Scarborough, Tobago. Madam President.
Please listen. Members, Senator Hussain, please, we are nearing the end of today's proceedings. Could we just listen in silence to the last speaker, please?
Thank you, Madam President. So, Madam President, I just want to say and remind people what the particular issue was on that Sea Bridge when we had that first budget presentation. It was that there was not enough spaces for the demand during the high travel periods between August and Easter. And I remember, because in my first budget presentation, I made a prediction in relation to that Sea Bridge. And when the port of Tobago was announced, I indicated that we would need 4 vessels to service those 2 bridges. And I can say today, Madam President, that this administration has purchased 1, which is currently operational, that would take up service when the Tobago port is built for the bridge between Tobago and Scarborough, and 2 that are currently being built that would arrive in mid-2020. So, Madam President, I say not bad at all for a prediction. But what I will tell the Minister of Works today is that we still want to afford both. And I'm just putting that out there for consideration. On the way. There you have it, Madam President. But, Madam President, so confident am I in this government and the projects that we have planned for Tobago that today I will make another prediction and put it on the Hansard record. Today, I predict that all those that decried and claimed mistreatment of Tobago in this chamber and in the other place will find themselves on the Galleon's Passage or on one of the new boats or find themselves walking through the new airport terminal in Tobago. They will gladly pay for a week-long stay in Sandals Resort Tobago, the biggest Sandals resort in the Caribbean. And when they enter their rooms, say a prayer for them. For that is when they will realize the vision of this government. A government that took a diamond in the rock that is Tobago, made it a diamond excavated, a diamond polished, a diamond whose true value can be seen by all who look upon it. Madam President, I say to all Tobagonians that can hear me, when you see them, show them the Tobago hospitality. Smile and wave. When you see them in the pirogue trying to race the Galleon's Passage, smile and wave. When you see them at the breakfast table at Sandals Resort Tobago, smile and wave. And thank them for their contribution to the economy of Tobago and the diversification of the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. For that is the vision of Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley. Madam President, in conclusion, the turnaround is fueled by a consistent drive to reduce expenditure and increase revenue. But not just to increase revenue already actualized, but to diversify revenue sources so that future shocks to our economy will have a much softer impact. This does not only require financial changes to be made, but behavioral and mental ones as well. This is why we initially asked citizens to build with us and to grow with us, so that we could achieve the turnaround we are experiencing. And as we progress towards a brighter future, we can one day realize our potential for paradise. Madam President, with those few words, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. Thank you very much, Madam President. And if you permit me, Mr. Vice President. Madam President, I beg to move that this Senate do now adjourn to Monday, the 22nd of October at 10 a.m. and we'll continue the Appropriation Financial Year 2019 Bills debate.
Honourable Senators, the question is that this Senate do now adjourn to Monday, the 22nd of October 2018 at 10 a.m. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This Senate now stands adjourned to Monday, the 22nd of October 2018 at 10 a.m.